For Julie, this girl was more than just a customer. Because sometimes a glance is more than just a look, it's a cry. And Julie, she truly saw her. But one morning, four black cars stopped in front of the restaurant. The window cracked open, and that silent girl whispered just one word, "Please." In that moment, Julie's life, and perhaps her fate, changed completely. It was early in the morning. The city hadn't fully woken up yet, and the hustle and bustle of the streets hadn't begun. The pale daylight that hit the restaurant's large windows filtered through the foggy glasses, falling onto the counter, filling the space with a delicate sense of peace. Julie was standing by the coffee machine in her rolled-up sleeves. That morning was just like the others, or at least, it seemed that way. Some of the first customers were familiar. The ones who came every day, ordered the same thing, and sat at the same table. One person had tea with 3 sugars. Another asked for the corners of their toast to be cut off. Julie had memorized them all, but one of them was very different from the others. That girl, Julie didn't know her name. She would mumble her order and then lower her head. She had neither a phone nor a book. She just sat, drank her tea, and stared into space. Some mornings, her hair would be wet, as if she had rushed out the door in a hurry. On other mornings, her hands would be cold and purple, and she'd sit with her coat wrapped around her. But she was there every morning, always at the same table, by the window, quiet. What had caught Julie's attention was this. How could someone be this quiet, this invisible? Most servers would just take the order and leave. But Julie had noticed more than just her order. The girl's eyes carried a deep exhaustion, but it wasn't an ordinary kind of exhaustion. It was as if years of silence had built up inside her. Even if she wanted to speak, it seemed like the words had escaped her. One morning, when Julie brought her tea, she noticed dried tears around the girl's eyes. She hadn't asked anything. She just left a napkin on the table and quietly walked away. The next day, the napkin had come back, tucked under the plate. Written on it, in shaky handwriting, were just these words: "Thank you for seeing me." Julie couldn't think of anything else the whole day. Hundreds of customers had come, dozens of tables had been cleaned, but all she could think about was that sentence. "Thank you for seeing me." It seemed that the girl really thought she wasn't seen. Maybe no one had looked at her for a long time, or worse, they had looked but hadn't truly seen her. The next day, Julie made the tea a little more carefully. She added a slice of cake on the side, a small kindness, in her own way. The girl was surprised but didn't say anything. She just slightly lowered her head. And that was when Julie made a decision. Every morning, she would do a little kindness for this girl. Maybe one day, she would tell her who she was. Maybe she wouldn't, but at least, she wouldn't be completely alone anymore. As clouds gathered outside, turning the sky gray, Julie looked inside. The girl was staring out the window, not at the people walking by, but as if looking at her past. And Julie felt that this story had only just begun. She still knew nothing. Not her name, not where she was from, not who her parents were. But very soon, everything would change. The morning was colder. The mist hitting the windows fought against the warm air inside, with droplets sliding down the glass. Julie had arrived early, as usual, checking the tables, filling up the sugar dispensers, and occasionally calling out to the kitchen. But her mind was always on the door that opened at the same time every day. It had become a habit. Her eyes would instinctively check that corner, and as the time approached, her heart would start to beat a little faster. And finally, the door opened again. But this time, it was different. The girl stepped inside with slower steps than usual. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes even emptier. Her coat was wet, as if she had been walking for a long time or had been outside for a while. Her hair was messy, and there was a faint trace of an old bruise on her face hidden but not completely healed. Julie's hand froze on the tray. The girl didn't make eye contact, but there was something in the way she walked. When she reached the usual corner table and sat down, Julie quickly set about preparing tea and cake. But when she went to take the order, the girl only spoke in a whisper without raising her head. "A glass of water. That's enough." Julie hesitated for a moment. "Of course," she said gently. But a few minutes later, she didn't just bring water to the table. She also left a warm cup of tea and a small plate of cake. The girl looked at it in surprise, but didn't respond. She just slightly lowered her head. Before leaving the table, Julie bent down slowly and softly asked, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" The girl didn't raise her head. Her lips moved, but no words came out. And a few seconds later, she suddenly stood up. She grabbed her bag, and without even looking at Julie, she walked out quickly. When the door closed behind her, all the sounds inside the restaurant seemed to lose their meaning at once. Julie looked down at her empty tray, and a feeling washed over her. The girl wasn't asking for help, but maybe she needed it now more than ever. But how? She still didn't know the girl's name. Her story was still a mystery. And for the first time, Julie had the unsettling feeling that something bad could be happening. She looked outside, but the girl had already disappeared from view. But the cake and water left on the table, those were a cry. A quiet, suppressed cry for help. Would she come again the next morning? Julie didn't know. But that table, that corner, was no longer just an ordinary spot. It was now the place where an unnamed life had left its mark. And that mark was sinking deeper each day. Julie had woken up early that morning too. She opened her eyes without the alarm going off, because her body's rhythm had become trapped between exhaustion and time. After putting water for tea, she stopped by her mother's room. In the pale light, she listened to her mother's breathing for a while. She was sleeping, just like usual. Even on her good days, her mother never spoke, and now she could barely communicate with her eyes. But Julie, as she did every morning, placed a small kiss on her forehead. With the exhaustion in her eyes, she returned to the kitchen, threw a few aspirin in her pocket, grabbed her coat, and left for work. When she arrived at the restaurant, her eyes automatically went to the right corner as she walked in. The girl's table. It was empty, just like every morning. Julie tried not to pay attention at first. Maybe the girl hadn't come because of the rain. Maybe she'd gone somewhere else. But this was the third day. The quiet girl wasn't coming anymore. The empty table greeted her the same way every morning. The same misty window, the same tablecloth, the same empty chair. And Julie, while wiping the table, was always more careful with that one, as if a small part of her still lingered there. A sense of unease was growing inside her. A strange worry. She didn't know anything about the girl, but she felt her absence like the absence of an acquaintance. It was odd. They weren't friends. They hadn't even spoken. But Julie had gotten used to knowing she was there. And now that she wasn't, Julie felt both sad for the girl and aware of the emptiness within herself. Lately, Julie had been working extra shifts at the restaurant. Her boss was understanding, as Julie always arrived on time, worked quietly, did her job, and never became a burden to anyone. She had no other choice. She needed those extra hours to afford her mother's medicine, the electricity bill, and groceries. While many people her age were having fun, Julie spent her lunch breaks in the back, drinking cold coffee. She knew what it was like to go without. Matching the bill's due date with her bank balance, reusing tea bags 3 times, buying groceries by the gram. All of it was familiar. But in the midst of all this, she had learned to protect herself, to stay strong, until she met that silent girl. Julie had realized for the first time that she was thinking about someone else, someone other than herself, without expecting anything in return. And now could something bad have happened to that girl? When that thought first struck her mind, it sent a chill through her. Maybe she had just moved away, maybe she had gone back to her family, but maybe something worse? She worked quietly until noon. But every time she brewed tea, every time she heard someone ask for a glass of water, please, from the orders coming in, her eyes always searched for that table. And the emptiness of that table sat in Julie's chest like a heavy stone. What was the girl's name? Where was she from? And where was she now? Julie didn't know. But her instincts told her something wasn't right. The silence gnawing at her. Maybe it wasn't just the girl's silence. Maybe it was the echo of the silence Julie had buried deep within her own past. And there was one more thing she didn't know. That empty table would soon lose its silence, and Julie's life would never be the same again. That morning, the sky was leaden gray. Julie had arrived early again, but there was an indescribable weight in the air. She had felt it when she woke up. Something was approaching. The silence was too dense, the atmosphere too still. As she opened the restaurant door, her eyes instinctively went to the right corner of the room. Of course, it was empty. It had been 3 weeks. Still no sign of the girl. No notes, no trace. Every morning, Julie felt like a little more of herself was missing. Even when she wiped down the table, she was more careful, secretly hoping to find a small clue left behind. By midday, the restaurant had gotten a little busier. The door opened, customers came in, and orders were being taken. Julie glanced once more at the empty table. her heart still involuntarily connected to that corner. And then, a sound, like the screech of brakes, but softer. She turned and saw 4 black cars parked right outside the restaurant. They were all the same model, dark-tinted windows, spotless, luxurious. It was like a scene from a movie. People began looking out the window. The doors didn't open at the same time. That was even stranger. 2 men got out of the first car. They wore black suits and had earpieces. Their steps were quiet but purposeful. They entered the restaurant. Their eyes locked directly on Julie. Julie instinctively grabbed the edge of the counter. A surge of fear rose within her, but she didn't show it. The men's faces were expressionless. "Miss Julie," one of them asked. Julie cleared her throat. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to speak with you. Please come with us." A hush fell over the restaurant. Conversations at the tables stopped. All eyes turned to Julie. Her first reaction was to run, but there was nowhere to run. "Why?" she asked. "You're not in danger." "It's just an invitation," the man said. Julie took a step back. Her eyes were still locked on the cars outside. She was scared. She didn't know what was happening, but instinctively, she knew this was no ordinary matter. "No, I won't go," she said, her voice steady but hesitant. The men paused for a moment. Then, one from the second car leaned into his earpiece. Silence. Then the rear window of the third car slowly rolled down, and Julie held her breath. Behind the glass, a familiar face appeared. That face the girl who sat at the same table every morning, silently drinking her tea, never saying a word. But this time, there was something else in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was a kind of pleading. The girl locked eyes with Julie. Her lips trembled, and a word, as quiet as a whisper, reached Julie through the glass. "Please." Julie felt as if her knees were going to give way. Her heart began to pound, thumping in her chest like it would burst. That one word silenced all her questions. All her fears, all her doubts retreated in an instant. Because that girl, the silent one, the one who never made eye contact, the one who always kept her distance, had finally asked for something. And Julie couldn't ignore that plea, but she still didn't know what to say yes to. As the window closed, everything felt even more unfamiliar. The men stepped back. Only one remained, holding the door open for Julie. Silent, waiting. Julie took a step toward the door. Then she took a deep breath. And then, another step. And as she stepped outside, the only thing on her mind was one sentence. "No matter what happens, I won't leave her alone." The car traveled down a long road. As they drove farther from the city, everything around them grew quieter. When Julie looked out the window, what she saw wasn't the familiar streets, signs, or shops she was used to. Behind high walls, in front of iron gates, and behind sliding fences, a different world was beginning. And this world was far from hers. Finally, a large iron gate opened. The vehicle passed through a wide courtyard and stopped in front of a mansion, its front adorned with stone columns. Julie, still struggling to believe what was happening, stepped out of the car. The windows opened, the doors opened, and the staff moved aside. And there she was, the silent girl walking slowly toward Julie. Today was different. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, her face still holding that familiar shyness. But this time, there was no hiding in her eyes, only deep gratitude. Julie didn't know what to say when the girl, for the first time, used her voice. "My name is Max." Julie froze. She swallowed. She couldn't utter a single word. Max. That was not a name she had ever imagined for her. Maybe Lily, maybe Anna, but Max? Simple, short, strong. Max gave a small smile. Then she touched Julie's arm. "We wanted to thank you," she said. At that moment, someone emerged from the large gate. A tall man with a stern gaze, dressed sharply in a suit. His posture exuded authority. As he approached, he extended his hand. "I'm Max's father. I wanted to personally thank you." Julie's eyes widened. She noticed her fingers trembling as she reached out to shake his hand. This man, he was no ordinary person. And within seconds, the truth came out. The man invited Julie inside. They sat in a large hall, surrounded by wide leather chairs. Coffee was served. Everything unfolded slowly. Then the man began to speak. "I am the owner of a large holding company. My name is Daniel. A lot has changed in the business world in recent years. Enemies, competitors, threats. Unfortunately, things cannot always be solved in boardrooms. Not long ago, I received a serious threat regarding Max. They wanted to use her. They threatened to kidnap her. And we made a decision. Max would disappear. She would be gone for a while. Julie listened with her mouth agape. Max, with her head lowered, silently nodded at her father's words. But things didn't go as planned, Daniel continued. We lost contact with Max. We were only communicating through secure channels. But those channels went silent. And Max, suddenly, was left all alone. Truly alone. Without money, without protection. Completely on her own. Max raised her head, looking into Julie's eyes. Her voice was now clearer. I was staying in a hostel. My money had run out. I couldn't go back because I was being followed. I couldn't trust anyone. But every morning, you were there. Someone smiling. Someone who didn't ask questions. But someone who saw. And for the first time in years, I felt safe. Julie couldn't believe her eyes. Her mind was spinning. This quiet girl, this silent customer. Was she the heir to a billion-dollar empire? The young girl who came in with a worn-out coat, asking only for water. Was she at the center of this entire world? Daniel continued. Eventually, we found her trace. We reestablished our security system. We're safe now, and we were able to bring Max back home. But she hasn't forgotten you. She told us about you. That's why you're here. Julie lowered her head. It felt as though something inside her had cracked. But it wasn't a bad crack. More like an awakening. In a life where she had always felt unnoticed, learning that she had changed someone's life so deeply was indescribable. Max softly whispered, "You were good before you even knew me." And in that moment, Julie understood. Sometimes a simple kindness, a cup of tea and a piece of cake, can change a person's life forever. As the heavy door of the mansion closed behind them, silence filled the room. Daniel stood in front of the fireplace in the center of the room, now looking at Julie. In his eyes, there was no longer the cold hardness of the business world, but the warm gaze of a father. "Julie," he said calmly, "if you asked me, I'd tell you that my wealth has changed many lives. But it was you who changed my daughter's life." Julie was silent. She thought there was nothing to say. She had just acted on instinct. It had been a simple, small kindness in her eyes. Daniel took a deep breath, then approached and pulled a small card from his jacket pocket, handing it to Julie. "Ask for anything from me," he said. "Money, work, education, travel, a home. Whatever it is. You deserve so much more than anything I have." Julie stood frozen. She didn't take the card. She simply shook her head slowly. "I don't want anything," she said softly. "I was just trying to be a good person." At that moment, silence fell over the room again. But this time, the silence was one of respect. It was the echo of emotion and humanity. Daniel lowered his head, but then he smiled. "That's exactly why. We owe you," he said. A second later, an envelope was placed in front of Julie. Inside it was a document. Max stood silently beside her, her eyes slightly teary. Daniel continued, "You didn't ask for this, but I did some research. I know about your mother's illness. It has seemed like an incurable condition for a long time. But there's an experimental treatment in Switzerland. It's a special program applied only to certain patients. I spoke with the clinic owner there. I've arranged a spot for your mother. All expenses will be covered by me. If you apply today, she can begin treatment next week." Julie's eyes filled with tears. Even when her voice trembled, she couldn't say anything. For the first time in her life, someone had understood her silence. She had always been invisible to others, but today, for the first time, the weight in her life was shared. "I thank you," she said, barely managing to speak. But those two words carried the pain, burden, hope, and gratitude she had accumulated for years. Max stepped closer. Now, she was no longer a stranger, but a real person who had touched Julie's life. "My father's right. You didn't ask for anything, but I owe you everything," Max said sincerely. "It wasn't just the tea and cake. You made me feel like I was human. You didn't hide me. You didn't pity me. You saw me." Julie smiled and reached out her hand to Max's. "You reminded me I wasn't alone." Outside the door, a new life awaited them. As Max walked away, stronger with each step, Julie decided, for the first time, not just to look at others but to give herself a chance too. Because sometimes life begins with a small table and a hot cup of tea. And sometimes, someone invisible makes all lives visible. Sometimes, a small kindness forever changes a silent life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, The greatest change comes from someone invisible.